Hello everybody, welcome to this lecture on you and the law in your new career as teachers. I thought today's lecture should be devoted to consideration of the code of conduct of teachers here in Alberta, as well as the Teaching Profession Act in Alberta. And I thought I might start us off with an ethical code as well, thinking about teacher ethics. What kind of a teacher am I going to be? How am I going to be in my classroom? What kind of a person am I called on to be as a teacher? These are important things to consider. Okay, so when we look at teaching, when I started teaching, when I went through my Bachelor of Education program, I went through the University of Calgary to receive my Bachelor of Ed. And back then I went through a program that's now gone. They killed it. It's done dead. Used to be called the Master of Teaching program. It had its good points and its not so good points. One of the really good points about it, though, is on the very back cover of the old Master of Teaching program handbook. I think it was my supervising instructor during my graduate studies. I think he was the guy who wrote this. But anyway, he called it a Socratic Oath. Essentially, he and I guess the other people who envisioned the program, the old MT program, had in mind some grand ideas about when we go into teaching, the sorts of things that we should keep always at least in the back of our mind somewhere, so that, maybe at the end of the day or at the end of a school year or whatever, these things come back to us and help orient us. We ask how we're doing, how we're feeling about teaching. So I'm just going to read to you the back cover of my old handbook from when I was doing my B.Ed. So here it goes. It's called the Socratic Oath. In memory of Socrates, of Confucius, of Hypatia, of Montessori, and all the great teachers of the past, I solemnly promise that if I'm unable to carry out my teaching responsibilities with competence and integrity, then I shall summon the courage to leave teaching to others. That's a good first one. Second, I shall do everything in my power to help those in my care and trust to learn and to advance understanding and knowledge. Thirdly, I shall always counsel the disciplined understanding of whatever is at hand and never encourage the irrational and the unwise. The next point, I shall endeavor to encourage a lifelong love of learning, of wisdom of texts, and of thought. Next, I shall never use the power of my position as a teacher for my own personal advantage or to the disadvantage of others. And finally, I shall always respect the humanity and individuality of those in my care in order to bring out the best in each. I think that's a really great oath. The more legalistic ones that we're going to look at in a minute here, they're harder to read, and maybe they don't strike to the heart of things as much as this Socratic Oath. So the other ones are the legal ones that we're responsible to abide in, but maybe this one sums up all the other stuff really nicely in a way that will simplify for you and be able to help you to keep it closer to your own heart as you enter teaching. Okay, so imagine most of you who are clicked on this YouTube lecture, your probably ambition is to teach in Alberta and be a public school teacher in some fashion. So you're going to be interested in the Code of Professional Conduct. And this is basically the guideline for your relation to students, colleagues, school authorities, and the teaching profession. So I put a little note here that the Code of Professional Conduct applies to teachers employed by public schools as well as separate schools. So that's our Catholic schools out here in Alberta, right? Also francophone boards, but it doesn't apply to charter schools or private schools. So you're not beholden to the same professional code of conduct things there. There you'll have to pay attention to what those particular schools are looking for, and you have to read very carefully what you've signed on to in those particular situations. But here it's all laid out very clearly. Okay, so the first aspect is of your professional code of conduct is in relation to your pupils, the people who you're teaching. So the teacher teaches in a manner that respects the dignity and rights of all persons without prejudice to race, religious beliefs, color, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, physical characteristics, disability, marital status, family status, age, ancestry, place of origin, place of residence, socioeconomic background, or linguistic background. You know how important that one is and how wide it is. It's really about equality rights, right? Like everybody in your classroom, every student you treat equally and fairly. Now it's interesting because when we start looking at law and litigation against teachers, one of the things that you'll notice is that teachers, say you're working in a separate school, right? In a Catholic school, you're working there, you're hired on to teach there, whether you're elementary or junior high school or senior high school. You have to abide by church doctrine in order to work there. And so one of the things you'll see in some of the court cases that we'll study is, if you're, married in a civic marriage, or suppose you get divorced, or suppose I don't know if they still do it, but say you had a child out of wedlock, or say you were gay or lesbian and you entered into a same-sex marriage. Trying to think of some other things like that anyway, that are deemed to be not within the lines of Catholic doctrine or dogma. You could get fired, and bang, that's it. And they're full within their rights to do that because Catholic separate schools are protected under the Canadian Constitution ever since the beginning of Canada, the BNA Act, right? Which we'll learn about in one of the next lectures. So just be aware that we as teachers are in many ways held to, in some ways, I guess, you could be discriminated against as a teacher, and it's allowed, but we're not allowed as teachers to do that ever towards any of our students. Okay, so there is a bit of a double standard with regard to teachers and pupils in that regard. Second thing, the teacher is responsible for diagnosing educational needs, prescribing and implementing instructional programs, and evaluating progress of pupils, right? You guys know all that. And second, the teacher may not delegate these responsibilities to any person who is not a teacher. So in other words, I guess what you would do is you'd say, am I allowed to have students mark each other's work? Am I allowed to have my, middle school age daughter mark multiple choice questions for me at home because I have a pile of kids' work to mark that's 6 feet high? Am I allowed to have my husband or my wife or my whoever's living with me, say, who maybe has a PhD in English, mark these English papers for me even though he or she isn't a teacher? There's these gray areas, right? And different things are said about that in the court and in litigation. We'll look at that too. But these are the sorts of things that you're signing on for, right? A third thing, the teacher may delegate specific and limited aspects of instructional activity to non-certified personnel, provided that the teacher supervises and directs such activity. So if I'm sitting next to perhaps a student who's helping me, with different things, like suppose you've got a work-study student in your classroom, right? And, you're trying to fulfill your own duties as a teacher. The students in there trying to get credits, work credits, and you're teaching them how to, use a specific kind of technology in the classroom or do X, Y, or Z. And it just so happens that maybe that has some component that relates to instruction that you've done with your students or something. Like, is there a gray area there? I'm allowed to do that if I am constantly supervising them to see how they're doing, right? Maybe. What about number 4? The teacher treats pupils with dignity and respect and is considerate of their circumstances. All right. So, how big of, to put it, kind of crudely, how big of a hard ass are you going to be in your class, right? Are there good excuses for when things aren't done or when behavior is bad, or, and what's your response to when things aren't done or when behavior is bad? That sort of thing. Number 5, the teacher may not divulge information about a pupil received in confidence or in the course of professional duties except as required by law, or where, in the judgment of the pupil or of the teacher, to do so is in the best interests of the pupil. So that best interests thing is kind of a loosey-goosey thing, really. Like, what exactly does it mean, the best interests of the child or the best interests of the pupil? But the idea here is that, just to keep it simple, you don't gossip about your kids in your class. You don't share their work with other people without asking them. You don't. Even if it's like, especially say it's an adult student, right, or what they call out here in Alberta an independent student, say somebody who's like 18 or isn't living with his mom or his dad, or because of whatever's happened, divulging information about the student to the parent may not be allowed in those particular circumstances. And then there's FOIP too, eh? We'll talk about FOIP and the rest of it. Like when I was a kid, you could put kids' names on a chart, and then you could have the grades and stuff next to it, and you just look up your name, and there it was. You can't do that anymore, right? You still do it by student number, but you can't. Or even when I was a kid in university doing my undergraduate, our professor or our TA used to leave our papers for pickup out in the hall, right? If he wasn't there, or say, his office hours were done or whatever, you missed them for whatever reason, maybe you were late getting the bus or something, he'd leave a little chair and there'd be a box on the chair and you go search through and you could grab your paper, right? Can't do that sort of thing anymore. So there's lots of things like this. It's just, think about privacy, right? Like, think about protecting people from each other's prying eyes. So that's another problem with, like, when you get kids to mark each other's papers, right? Well, or mark each other's really simple work, like, multiple choice stuff, right? Well, so-and-so, I got to see that he flunked out, or this one, or whatever, right? So, if you're going to organize for those kinds of things, ask yourself, well, how instructional is that? What do the kids learn from doing that? But also, how can I protect people's identities and whatever? Okay, so that's another one. Number 6, the teacher may not accept pay for tutoring a pupil in any subjects in which the teacher is responsible for giving classroom instruction to that pupil. This one, in my time when I used to supervise students at another university in town here, this one comes up now and again. I get a student teacher who will say, I got to pay the rent, right? I'm a student, and I don't have a great job. I'm working at, 2 or 3 jobs, but one of the jobs that I have that's real handy because it's related to me wanting to be a teacher is I tutor at the library every weekend, or I tutor every Wednesday and Friday or something like that. And it just so happens that I've got students who I'm a student teacher for, who happen to be my pupils in my placement? Am I allowed to do that? And by this code of professional conduct, you're not allowed to, because there's quasi conflict of interest there, right? You'd be taking money from them in order to teach them, but then you'd be teaching them. So in that kind of a situation, even as a student teacher, definitely not as a teacher especially, right? You shouldn't be doing that. You should just like, well, can't teach you now, got to find somebody else to fill in that. It doesn't mean you can't be a tutor, you just can't tutor the kids that are actually your own students, whether it's in your student placement or whether it's when you become a teacher later in life, okay? And then number 7, the teacher may not take advantage of a professional position to profit from the sale of goods or services to or for pupils in the teacher's charge. So you shouldn't be trying to sell your kids things. It's funny because they'll come to you and they'll be selling you stuff, you know. They'll be like Girl Guides. Oh, do you want to buy some cookies? Or I used to get, oh, well, what about this Crunch and Munch, or this, like, I don't know, these big boxes of popcorn or tubs of popcorn the Boy Scouts would sell, or some girls would come and they'd have made beeswax candles, real fancy things some of them would make, right? Well, you're allowed to buy stuff from them, but it doesn't work. It's not a two-way street, right? So just remember that not everything that they're allowed to do is copacetic for you to do. Okay. The next section of the Code of Professional Conduct is in relation to school authorities. So, how do I behave? How am I expected to behave in relation to, the principal and the administrators and the rest of it, right? And not just that, but also the school board and the superintendent. And so, number 8, the teacher protests the assignment of duties for which the teacher is not qualified, or conditions which make it difficult to render professional service. So you're supposed to, in other words, avoid any kind of conditions that make it difficult for you to render professional service. The teacher fulfills contractual obligations to the employer until released by mutual consent, according to the law. So pay attention. What's your contract ask you to do? What are you required to do? Make damn good sure you're doing those particular things. All right. So, sometimes it's unclear, right? Like how, especially when you're new, it seems to me that, until you've got your permanent contract, sometimes there's a certain amount of, I think I'm okay with the word bullying personally, but it's the idea that, well, this, he's new or she's new, so they damn well better be doing exactly what I've told them to do, right? I've even had that. I've had partner teachers come to me about students that I've had under my protection, I guess, as the supervising instructor from the university, and they're like, well, when I was a student teacher, whatever my partner teacher said, I did. It didn't matter what it was. If they said jump, I'd say how high. So there's a certain expectation even beyond, like, say, after you get done being a student teacher, when you are hunting around trying to get your first contract and stuff, people are going to be wanting to see, well, how many things can you do? How badly do you want this, right? How many extra things can we pile on you? So just be careful about understanding what you're required to do, what you're not required to do. If you're not required to do it, obviously you don't have to do it, but sometimes in order to get your permanent, you kind of got to be everybody's dog in order to get there. Not always, but sometimes that's the way it is at different schools, under different administrators, amongst people with different attitudes towards younger people who are entering the profession. It's sad, but it's true. Another one, number 10, the teacher provides as much notice as possible of a decision to terminate employment. So, if you're sick of this, take this job and shove it, right? 30 days notice is the best thing that you can do. But, obviously there's going to be circumstances where that won't be possible, right? And so a decent administrator will understand. Teachers, like anyone else, they have family emergencies, things arise. Sometimes it's not always possible to give the 30 days notice, but it's whenever you can, that's what you should be doing. And if you don't, then you have to be prepared as a teacher to live with the consequences of whatever happens, right? Number 11, the teacher adheres to agreements negotiated on the teacher's behalf by the association. So the association is your union, right? So in Alberta, we got the ATA, Alberta Teachers Association. So whatever the agreement is that is ratified for, the CBE or for Rocky View or for Northern Lights or, whichever particular agreement that your school board falls under, that's what you should be abiding by. Okay, the next section in the right column there is in relation to colleagues. This one is pretty important, I would say. Probably a lot of you who are going into teaching have had other jobs. Maybe you've worked other jobs for quite a while, and you've come to see that in any job that you have, no matter how high or how low it is, on the pecking order of things, there are real nice people in some jobs, and then there's going to be those guys who are jerks, and some of them have power over you, right? And some of them are, the same level as you, and some people are below you, and, in the pecking order. And, it's not always going to be the case that life's going to be easy as a teacher. I've been in the position where I've been bullied pretty badly as a teacher by, another teacher, and it's horrible. So the ATA is there, to protect you, but also, there's certain channels that you're supposed to follow through, even when you're getting picked on or being bullied on, or so there's certain manners in which channels through which you're supposed to operate. So that's what this section's all about. So the teacher doesn't undermine the confidence of pupils in other teachers. You're not supposed to be bad-mouthing other teachers. Sometimes other teachers do really nasty things, and you'll find out about those things through kids talking to you. You can listen to that. It's not like you have to necessarily defend the teacher, in the earshot of the other students. You can certainly listen, you can sympathize, you can ask questions if you like, but it's not, you have to be careful ever about saying anything negative or critical of another teacher within earshot of not just your students, but I would say even of other teachers. You have to be careful. You can't trust your own personal thoughts and feelings on things to everyone. Not everyone who teaches with you, even if it's a good teacher, is going to be friendly. So just it's like any workplace. You have to be careful about what you say and who you say it to, right? 13, the teacher criticizes the professional competence or professional reputation of another teacher only in confidence to proper officials and after the other teacher has been informed of the criticism, subject only to Section 24 of the Teaching Profession Act. So this is a tricky one, right? I know of people who, have had other teachers attack them even in front of other teachers, right? Or even in front of custodial staff coming up and saying pretty nasty things about them to them in front of their face and stuff like this. And so, you have a problem and so you take it directly to the principal or the AP or the department head or something. You're not supposed to. The first thing you're supposed to do is, go to the person and say what the problem is with them. Talk to them privately. Like, don't approach the person out in the hallway and say, here's the place where I'm going to, vent all my difficulties and my problems with, the way you've done X, Y, or Z or whatever. You do it in private, and you try to do it as professionally as possible. And you have to make that happen first before you can then go on to the next step and the next step and the next step, which hopefully doesn't come to that. Hopefully things can be settled just between you and that other person, right? So that's really important. Number 14, the teacher, when making a report on the professional performance of another teacher, does so in good faith, and prior to submitting the report, provides the teacher with a copy of the report, subject only to Section 24 of the Teaching Profession Act. So we'll look at that act briefly now, but you can see that this is really important, that before anything gets escalated, before you go to the next step with a thing, you have to first of all make sure that the teacher who you have the problem with, or who is being unfair towards you or something like that, that they're given full awareness of what your beef is, or it's not like even necessarily you're attacking them. You're just saying maybe that person is being wholly unfair towards me. Maybe they're totally always attacking me. Maybe, but even though it's weird, like even if you're the victim, even if this person is egregiously toying with you and playing with you, in a way you have to let them know first that I'm going to, that's not acceptable, and I'm going to take it to the next level, and here's what I've written about you and the rest of it. So just be aware of that. We'll come back to Section 24 in a second. Number 15, the teacher does not take, because of animosity or for personal advantage, any steps to secure the dismissal of another teacher. So you don't go around trying to get someone else fired. Number 16, the teacher recognizes the duty to protest through proper channels, administrative policies and practices which the teacher cannot in conscience accept, and further recognizes that if administration by consent fails, the administrator must adopt a position of authority. And number 17, the teacher as an administrator provides opportunities for staff members to express their opinions and to bring forth suggestions regarding the administration of the school. All right, so the last two have to do with administrators. So, principals and vice principals, these people, they're your colleagues too, right? And sometimes they're going to be helpful, and sometimes they're not at all helpful. And, what do you do in that situation? I just want to look at Section 24 of the Act, the Teaching Profession Act, briefly here. Here it is. So, Section 24 is the one here I've got in pink for us. So it's about making a complaint. So any person may make a complaint to the executive secretary, and the complaint shall be dealt with in accordance with this act and the bylaws. So it doesn't matter if you're a first-year teacher or a teacher on a temp contract or a teacher who's been teaching 30 years, and you can make a complaint if something bad is going on or something unacceptable is happening between you and someone else. Number 2, a superintendent who has reason to believe that a member has been or may have been convicted of an indictable offense shall make a complaint to the executive secretary and advise the registrar of that belief. All right, so that's, if they find out that you stole the crown jewels or something, they're entitled to do something about it. Number 3, notwithstanding anything contained in the bylaws, a member who believes that another member is guilty of conduct that contravenes Sections 16 to 65 shall make a complaint forthwith. All right, so, there's certain things that, you're not supposed to I don't think you're necessarily ever supposed to turn a blind eye to anything, right? But certain actions, if you know a teacher is up to things that are harmful towards students, right? Or that are illegal or something like that, or harmful to the school, it's not there just a matter of, well, that guy's a jerk or something like that. It's something much more serious, and you can't just sit on those sorts of things, right? You have to make it known. You have to expose that. So that's what that's about. That in other words, like if there are certain instances where you can't, by saying nothing, you yourself become culpable for some penalty, some punishment in that regard. Okay, so number 4, if after a person's membership in the association lapses or has been suspended or cancelled, a complaint is made about the former member, or the complaint relates to conduct occurring before the lapse, suspension, or cancellation, the complaint may be dealt with under this Act as if the suspension or cancellation hadn't occurred. If the complaint is made to the executive secretary within 5 years after the date, so even after you're done teaching, you've been booted out, or something really bad has happened, even 5 years after that, you can be hunted down like a dog. So just be aware that entering into teaching is a wonderful profession, but also you're held to a very high standard. Like, in many ways, I would say it's a way higher standard of behavior than pretty much any other job in a lot of ways. You're always in the public eye. People are sometimes fair, sometimes quite unfair in the way that they judge you. People's expectations of you are sometimes really extraordinary and unfair or unrealistic. But you have to be aware of all these things, and sometimes life can be difficult. So just knowing, having thought about the Code of Conduct, having thought about the Teaching Profession Act, knowing what you're responsible for, knowing what your contract states, knowing what all the expectations are, and then living within them, that is really important as you teach. Okay, so I guess we've dealt with 15, 16, and 17. I'll scoot along past those now. And the last section of the Code of Conduct is in relation to the profession itself. So not in relation to your students or school authorities, like the people who gave you the job, right? Or colleagues, like your fellow teachers or teaching assistants, or the principal. But in relation to the profession itself. So the teacher acts in a manner which maintains the honor and dignity of the profession. Like, if you're doing things that gives teaching a bad name, gives your school a bad name, there could potentially be some trouble there for you, and you have to watch out for that. Number 19, the teacher does not engage in activities which adversely affect the quality of the teacher's professional service. So are there things outside of teaching that you do that will affect your ability to, be professional in your activities at work? Like, maybe you drink an awful lot, right? How does your drinking affect your work? Or, if say you have a gambling problem or something, how does that affect? Or, I don't know, like, you can imagine certain kind of, what I guess they call now lifestyle choices too, right? Like, how would certain proclivities that you have affect your ability to do your job? Number 20, the teacher submits to the association disputes arising from professional relations with other teachers which cannot be resolved by personal discussion. So everything, do it do it personally between you and the other person first, right? I don't know if you live in a city or a town. Here in Calgary, I live in this neighborhood where people don't talk to each other, but what they love to do is phone the city bylaw officers, and rather than talk to the neighbor about, picking up the sticks in his front yard, or pulling weeds or whatever that have grown up between his house and the next house, rather than just mention that or whatever, or having a dilapidated vehicle or something, they just phone bylaw, and they circumvent ever talking to one another, and it makes for ugliness in a neighborhood, right? So think about teaching in a way as you with your neighbors, and your neighbor happens to be a teacher. The first thing you should do isn't go to the bylaw officer, who maybe is the principal, or maybe who is the higher ups in the school board or something, or the ATA or whatever, but go to the person first. Okay, and then let's see. The teacher makes representations on behalf of the association or members thereof only when authorized to do so. So, you don't go around talking as though you're a spokesman for the ATA when you're not a spokesman for the ATA. And then number 22, the teacher accepts that service to the association is a professional responsibility. Okay, so the idea there is that when you teach, it's really good for you to get involved in ATA activities, right? Become involved in the profession. Teachers, lots of people, especially out here in Alberta, slam unions, and they think that we're all a bunch of commies or something. But really, unions play a very, very important role in society and in teaching. Unions are very important, and so, but they're only important. Their importance is how good they are depends on the sorts of people who inhabit them, right? If you want the union to be good and to be helpful, and you're good and helpful, then get in there and try to make a difference. Try to lend your assistance. It's extra workload on top of all the other crazy stuff that you'll have to do as a teacher, but it's really good to get involved with the ATA or whatever union it is that you may be part of across Canada as you enter the profession. Okay. The next thing I'd like to ask you is, what happens when there are out of the ordinary conflicts with your colleagues, or when a teacher is found not to be competent at his or her job, right? So, see, there's always conflict. Teaching every day as a teacher, there's going to be a conflict that you're going to have to deal with. Okay, it's not, if you don't like conflict, if you don't feel confident about being able to deal with conflict, you really shouldn't be a teacher. And you maybe enter and you're nervous about it, right? Like, who isn't nervous about it? The worst conflicts for me, I hated parent-teacher interviews, even though most of my parent-teacher interviews went just fine. But I always had anxiety around it because, you get the 1 out of 100 where somebody comes in just gunning for you, right? But I guess, in a way, familiarity makes things easier for you. So, but that being said, there are these out of the ordinary instances, and then what do you do then? Well, the Teaching Profession Act is a very important document here in Alberta, and it lays out some answers to that, or some of the channels whereby those sorts of issues can be resolved. I'm not going to go through the whole Teaching Profession Act with you, because that would be insane and it would bore you and you'd want to kill me or kill yourself. I would like to talk about a few different things that arise in the Teaching Profession Act that might be of interest to you as someone who's new. Here we're talking about ATA membership, services, the organization itself, conflict resolution. I want to talk about those things with you. There's a section on membership. Membership in the ATA is compulsory if you're going to teach in Alberta. I want to talk about unprofessional conduct, making a complaint. Again, we've already touched on those, sections 23 and 24, right? Section 5, let me discuss this first. All teachers employed by a school board in Alberta are required, as a condition of employment, to be active members of the Alberta Teachers Association. Okay, so if you want to teach in a separate school board, right, or in a francophone school or a public school, you're going to have to be a member of the ATA. Now, that doesn't apply, interestingly enough, to charter schools. And yes, charter schools are public schools. Okay, but it doesn't apply there. I guess you could have a membership to the ATA, but they can't help you with anything. If anything bad happens to you in a charter school, you're on your own. They can't help you. Okay? And then another thing, same goes with private schools, right? The ATA can't help you. So, now currently there are 13 charter schools operating across Alberta. Unlike private schools, they're fully funded by the provincial government and are not supposed to charge tuition, so they can't charge students to go there, right? Well, they purport to be public schools. Unlike the province's public, separate, or francophone school authorities, charter schools are not governed by elected school boards. See, so Section 5. They're not governed by elected school boards accountable to the larger community and are exempt from the requirement to accommodate students with special education needs. So in all your classes, if you're not teaching in a charter school or in a private school where they, cream the kids out or something, you're going to have kids from all different age, abilities and strengths and difficulties, and it's going to be a real mix, and you have to give each kid your best attention. In a charter school, they can pick and choose. They don't have to, if they don't want to, they don't have to have LD kids there. They don't have to have kids there with disabilities. They can keep them out if they want. Okay, so that's one thing. Also, private school teachers likewise are not able to be affiliated with the ATA and cannot likewise benefit from ATA protections if something happens while you're working there as teachers. Okay, so these are two places that the ATA can't help. Upholding professional standards. Again, we've talked about this briefly. Section 23. Professional conduct, what does that mean? Professional conduct refers to any behavior that is becoming to a member of the teaching profession. Anyone can file a complaint of unprofessional conduct against a member. The association investigates each such complaint. Teachers found guilty of unprofessional conduct face, depending on the severity of the offense, penalties ranging from a reprimand to a fine to expulsion from the association to suspension or cancellation of certification. So again, before you can do that, you have to first of all go to the teacher and say you're being unprofessional, or and here's, you can't just, you first of all have to make such things known to the teacher with whom you have the disagreement. Okay? So what is unprofessional conduct? Unprofessional conduct is behavior by an ATA member that exhibits any of the following characteristics. So it's detrimental to the best interests of students. So again, that's loosey-goosey, right? What does that mean? So sometimes, teachers look down on each other, right? Oh, well, that guy's a crap teacher, therefore he's not teaching in the best interests of his students, or doesn't make the kind of decisions that I would make. Well, okay, but does that necessarily mean just because he's not you and he's not doing things the exact same way that you're doing it, does that necessarily mean what you think it means? So you have to be careful, about talking about the best interests of students. Lots of different people think lots of different things. You're going to find that even, some folks think that it's not in their own children's best interests to do non-academic English, for instance, even though they can't read or they have these learning disabilities, or they're not motivated in any way to keep up with homework or with daily work or with or maybe they're not interested in becoming a lawyer, and the child's parents are, no, my son is or my daughter is going to be a lawyer, going to be a doctor, or going to be you're going to find that there's a lot of gray area in what counts as best interests of the student. So that's a difficult one. So other things are things that contravene the Teaching Profession Act or the Code of Professional Conduct, right? That's a little bit more clear. Or things that have the potential to harm the standing of teachers generally. So things that you do or you've done or the other teachers done or said that make people think ill of teachers. And then leads to a conviction or indictable offense. So if you're up to crime, well, that's unprofessional conduct. Okay? A member who refuses to cooperate with an investigator appointed by the executive secretary may also be charged with unprofessional conduct. So if you're not cooperative, if someone's doing an investigation of you, then that can just make things worse, I guess, right? The association doesn't have the authority to investigate the conduct of teachers employed in charter or private schools either. So just remember that. Complaints about the conduct of such teachers should be addressed to the Minister of Education. So you got to go all the way to the top. If something happens in one of those types of schools, ATA can't help you. You just got to rely on that minister up there, and she's a busy person. And again, who can file a complaint? We already talked about this. Anyone who has concerns about the conduct of an ATA member, including parents, other teachers, or a member of the public, can ask for an investigation. And then there's also, besides teachers behaving badly or whatever, there's also incompetent professional practice. So, maybe you're not behaving badly, but maybe, I don't know, maybe you're just not that great at what you're doing. Maybe you don't know how to teach well or these sorts of things. And it's not just that you're learning or that, you're new to the gig and so you don't know how to do it. And it takes time to learn how to do it, but it's like something more consistent and problematic and troublesome than that. Like it's something that doesn't look like it's ever going to be able to be expunged, right? So incompetent professional practice is the inability of an ATA member to consistently meet the requirement of the teaching quality standard. All right, so it's not, everybody has off days or even off weeks, right? But, if you're consistently failing to meet standards in your own teaching practices. And by the way, meeting standard doesn't mean that your kids are all, only getting 60s and nobody's getting a 90. That's not what we mean. What we mean by teaching quality standard is this little blue thing here, the Teaching Quality Standards document. You can get this off the Alberta Education website. It's the KSA document, or the Knowledge, Skills, and Attributes document that you're currently, probably in your own program, if you're in Alberta, you're already aware of this in some fashion. Like everybody who gets a degree in Alberta has to work on the little bulleted points that appear in the KSAs. So you have to learn certain knowledge base. You have to have certain skill set. You have to have certain attitudinal attributes or something like that in order to become licensed to go out there and gain your certification as a teacher, right? So you're all, as student teachers, working towards these things, but then even after you get in, there's still some that you're developing as a teacher. And so, if in your practice, when you're out there, you've got your first gig, or you're into your second or third year or something, and still things aren't going so well, and it's a consistent problem that doesn't seem to be finding any solution, or there's some serious problem, then that's what incompetent professional practice can look like. Okay? But again, this doesn't mean like that feeling that you have when you go out into your practicum right now and you just don't feel confident, right? Or you don't feel like you know everything that you need to, because honestly, you're new. Of course you're not going to know everything. It's a hard job, right? These people who have been teaching the same courses for 10 years or 20 years, like, of course they're feeling confident, because it's like they've failed grade 11 20 years straight, and they're going to know it backwards and forwards, right? So don't feel that you're somehow incompetent because you don't have the level of mastery over everything that everyone else does who's been at it longer than you. That's your learning curve. The learning curve is much different than incompetent professional practice. Incompetent practice implies much more than mere unsatisfactory performance, which occurs when a teacher fails to meet expectations in a particular aspect of his or her teaching practice. Such failures may be related to a particular circumstance, such as an inappropriate teaching assignment, and can usually be addressed by offering the teacher remedial assistance or some other form of support. Like, lots of times when you're a new teacher, what they'll do at your school is they'll give you someone who's kind of like almost like a mentor. I don't know if they'll call it that, but it'll be someone who's been at the school for a number of years, or who is a seasoned teacher. And that person sometimes it's just the department head, right? And he or she'll come in at the end of the day and say, hey, how's it going? Or how are things? Or, or someone who you can go to and who won't just spit in your face or scorn you for not knowing or being 100% perfect at things the first go round, right? That's how we improve as teachers, is when we have supports like that. And good schools have people like that and are filled with them. In other cases, unsatisfactory performance may be the result of an underlying medical condition, in which case the matter may be dealt with as a medical disability, right? So if something like that happens for you, I've had students in the past in high school who have had irritable bowel syndrome, and I've known of student teachers who have had that too, right? Or I've known of student teachers who have had what's called narcolepsy, where you fall asleep and things like this. Like, my gosh, that's a pretty hard one to deal with when you're a teacher, right? So how then do those things? How then do you deal with those things? Or what about like anxiety, right? Like, kids have anxiety, teachers have anxiety too. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be incompetent either, right? It just means that you've got a certain disability. In a good school, just like you wouldn't throw a teacher or a student to the dogs in your classroom, they shouldn't do that to you either. So it's not the same thing. Incompetent practice, by contrast, refers to a situation in which, even after receiving remedial assistance, a teacher still can't meet the expectations of the teaching quality standard. Okay, so you can see that it's different than a lot of the things that maybe you're going to find irksome or worrisome or challenging for you as you enter the profession. The association doesn't have the authority to review the practice of teachers employed in charter or private schools, right? So same thing. There again, you got to go to the Minister of Education. So just remember that. It's a quirk here in Alberta that we have charter schools. Nowhere else in Canada do we have them. The States have them all over the place, but we only have them here. And one of the things that charters that distinguishes them is the union has no sway in there, and part of that gives them certain powers over you as a teacher too. I'm not saying charters are a bad place, but to work. I mean, charters. I know plenty of teachers who love working at charter schools. I know teachers who are great teachers who work at charter schools. But I also know of teachers. I know of many teachers who have been fired from charter schools who aren't bad teachers, who are not incompetent teachers, but who don't have any job protection, right? They have a termination clause in there. It's some, I don't know. I don't know if it's still called it, but it's something like termination without cause, right? And so, I mean, charters are beholden to parents who come, and parents often go to charter schools with their kids because they're pissed off with the things that have happened to their kids, or their feelings about how public school education works in other places. So they have a bad feeling about it, so they bring their kids to the charter school, and they're already, many of them, on edge or have a certain idea about what teachers are and what a good teacher does. And so there's a sensitivity often among administrators at charters, so that when a parent complains, they have to, as the administrator, they have to look really tough, and they have to look responsive to their clientele, because if they don't, then their clientele walks, right? And charters are all about accountability, how can you be accountable if you're not acting on what parents want, and the rest of it. And so they'll rather than go and find out from the teacher who has been accused of not knowing how to do X, Y, or Z, or being incompetent at X, Y, or Z, they just look tough. It makes them look really good in the eyes of the parents. They can shit can that teacher and get another one in. And I know of people who that has happened to. And I do not agree with it at all. But that is one of the powers that they have. And the ATA cannot protect you if you go to a charter school. Now, I don't think it happens a lot, but I know of people who this has happened to. And they remain excellent teachers, and it's the loss of the charter school. In fact, I don't know. So I'm just saying that I'm not an enemy of charters. I want you to be aware that, because we're talking about this right now, that this is one of the things that you should know about if you decide you want to work in a charter. Maybe it's really an interesting place. It might be an all-girls school. It might be a science school. It might be an art school, right? It might be a music school. Who knows? I mean, it might be something that you're really motivated in, and you want to work there. Great. Just be aware of these certain things built right into the school, into the legislation. Okay, enough about that. I hope that you've had that lecture that I just gave you was helpful, that you found it instructional. The next one we're going to do concerns the Alberta School Act. All right, thanks for your attention.